exception of one music record, records are designed to be broken throughout the history of popular music. Because it is such an impossible and spectacular accomplishment, no other songwriter has even come close to matching it in the nearly half a century that has passed since it took place. The United States Billboard Hot 100 chart seen 4 consecutive #1 hits. Not in the capacity of a performer, not working with a single band, but rather as the sole or co-writer of 4 distinct songs, performed in succession by a line of various artists. And in the middle of it all was a man named Barry Gibb, a member of the Bee Gees, who possessed a voice that could cut through glass and a pen that could write tunes that seemed to ooze down from the skies. When the 1970s came to a close, Barry was more than just a pop star. A one-man hit factory, he was the kind of songwriter who could walk into a studio, listen to a producer's idea, and walk out with a future #1 single. He was a one-man hit factory. However, the hits were not the only thing that contributed to the remarkable nature of this run. It was the speed, the diversity, and the absolute domination of culture that made it so appealing. Barry was responsible for writing or co-writing 5 of the top 10 songs in the United States around the same time at one point in time. How was it that a single individual was able to achieve the most unrivaled songwriting run in the history of pop music in such a short period of time? Moreover, what were the consequences of living during the most creative period in the history of music, where every single note had to be flawless and every single lyric had to be able to affect millions of people? It is at this point that our story starts. This is the place to be if you are a fan of music stories that have not been reported before and that go beyond the headlines. Please click the like button, subscribe, and enable notifications. This is due to the fact that here at Retro Waves, we unearth the forgotten moments of history and the hidden meanings behind songs that you probably thought you knew. Right now, we are going to investigate the path that led Barry Gibb to become the author of the Unbreakable record. We were in the year 1977. There had been a previous instance in which the Bee Gees, Barry, Robin, and Morris had remade themselves. They began their career in the 1960s as balladeers who were influenced by the Beatles, but by the early 1970s, they had almost completely lost their importance. Adaptability, on the other hand, was something that Barry had in his back pocket. Robert Stigwood, the manager of the Bee Gees, recognized an opportunity as the disco movement started to gain momentum in underground clubs in New York and Philadelphia. Within the groove, the band leaned in closer. Barry originally experimented with the falsetto that would later become his signature in 1975 when he was performing on nights on Broadway. Electrifying was the end outcome. By the year 1977, Barry's songwriting had reached a fever pitch. Stig would approach the Bee Gees with a new idea while they were already working on tracks for what would eventually become the soundtrack to Saturday Night Fever. Stig was also writing music for other artists who were under his management. The logic was straightforward: disperse the Gibb magic around the area. It was successful. To begin, there was the song, You Should Be Dancing, and To Love in Such a Way. Then an avalanche of songs, not only for the Bee Gees but also for other vocalists such as Yvonne Elliman, Samantha Sang, and Andy Gibb, who is Barry's younger brother. Despite this, none could have possibly anticipated what would take place at the beginning of 1978. Barry's songs, whether they were written by him or co-written by him, continued to reach #1. One in the United States, with different singers and genres, but with the same characteristic touch to each song. The run was not intended to happen. That wasn't some kind of marketing gimmick. Simply put, it was due to the fact that Barry had written songs that were so excellent and so perfectly suited to the times that radio was unable to resist playing them. Nevertheless, there was a question that was hidden under the grins, the falsetto, and the figures that broke previously held records. Even Barry Gibb might be able to keep up with this pace. Simply because there is only one path to take once you reach the peak of the mountain, there is no other way to proceed. The most important thing was to keep one's life. It was in December of 1977 when the music of Saturday Night Fever began to rewrite chart history. This occurred as the film was exploding in theaters. The song, How Deep Is Your Love, by the Bee Gees was already at the top of the charts. On the other hand, Stayin' Alive was a cultural explosion that was unlike anything else. Within the confines of a chateau in France, Barry, along with his brothers Robin and Maurice, composed the song in the beginning as a part of a collection of recordings for the film. Not even the drum track was performed live. In order to generate that unrelenting disco heartbeat, it was a loop of the performance that drummer Dennis Bryan had given in Night Fever. This loop was performed continuously. As a result of Barry's preoccupation with surviving in the urban grind, the lyrics, which are characterized by their swagger and defiance, were written. It was further explained by him that the attitude had to be comparable to the strut that John Travolta displayed in the opening scene of the movie. He said that it was about surviving in the big city. It became the first of 4 straight chart toppers written or co-authored by Barry when it reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in February 1978. Barry was responsible for 2 of these chart toppers. However, here's the catch: Barry wasn't finished with it. During the same week that Stayin' Alive was at the top of the chart, he also released another song called Climbing Fast, which was performed by another artist. In its entirety, would it be possible for Barry to compete with himself with regard to the top of the charts? The second blow came from members of the family. Even though he was just 20 years old, Andy Gibb, Barry's youngest brother, was already on the verge of becoming a big pop star. A major hit was his first single, which was titled, "I Just Want to Be Your Everything." Barry was also responsible for writing the song. On the other hand, his subsequent work, Love is Thicker Than Water, was about to capture the spotlight. Barry had composed the song in 1976 while he was on a trip to Bermuda with his family. He was apprehensive to record it because he believed that it might not have the same level of excitement as his first hit. Insisted Barry on it. Reportedly, he advised him to have faith in him. In March of 1978, Love is Thicker Than Water rose to the top of the charts, taking the position of Stayin' Alive. As a matter of fact, Barry Gibb had successfully knocked himself off the top. The music industry had never seen anything like this before. 2 distinct performers, 2 consecutively successful chart tops, both of whom were written by the same person. Additionally, Barry was not only responsible for writing, but also for producing, arranging, and defining the aural environment in the studio. Nevertheless, something else that Barry had written was already in action at the same time that Love is Thicker Than Water was dominating the radio industry. A song that represents an artist who is not a member of the Gibb family and has an entirely different vibe. Is it possible that Barry's style may endure outside of the Bee Gees' world? The third hit was not only significant, it was a defining moment. Although it was originally intended to be the lead single from the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, Night Fever was ultimately dropped. There was a chord progression that Barry heard when he was strumming in the studio, and it was this progression that prompted the Bee Gees to write it. It was Robert Stigwood, the film's producer, who advocated for the title Saturday Night. However, the Bee Gees were successful in persuading him to choose Saturday Night Fever, one of the reasons being that the song's title. The song was filled to the brim with Barry's falsetto, rich harmonies, and a beat that seemed to crystallize the entire disco era. After being released as a single in February of 1978, it swiftly rose to the top of the charts. A moment in time when Love is Thicker Than Water was at its height. Night Fever had dethroned Andy's song by the time March rolled around, giving Barry his 3rd consecutive #1 hit as a songwriter. This achievement cemented Barry's position as the only person in the history of the world to replace himself at #1 twice in a row. Saturation was the term that critics used to describe it at the time, but Barry saw it as nothing more than writing music that people wanted to hear. According to what he mentioned in an interview, "You simply try to serve the song. What is true is that it is true." Now, the streak was attracting attention from throughout the whole business. Barry's countdown was a joke that radio programmers made, suggesting that they might as well rebrand the Top 40. Despite this, there was already another tune, a ballad, that was making its way to the door. A track that would demonstrate that Barry is capable of more than just disco. If he slowed down the tempo, would he still be able to keep the crown? The song If I Can't Have You, which was performed by Yvonne Elliman, was the 4th and last blow in this record streak. Barry had initially composed the song for the soundtrack of the film Saturday Night Fever, and the Bee Gees even recorded their own rendition of the song and released it. However, Robert Stigwood, who is known for his strategic thinking, made the decision that Yvonne Elliman should record it in order to provide more variation to the soundtrack. This arrangement was modified by Barry to accommodate her voice, with the falsetto edges being smoothed off. As a result of leaning into a vocal delivery that was passionate and almost imploring, the gamble was successful. The song, which was released in April 1978, quickly became the most popular song on the Billboard Hot 100 chart, surpassing Night Fever to become the #1 song for 4 consecutive months. Barry Gibb is responsible for writing or co-writing all of the hits. Bee Gees' Staying Alive is the first song. Love is Thicker Than Water, written by Andy Gibb, is the second. Bee Gees' Third Night Fever is the song. On the 4th spot is Yvonne Elliman's If I Can't Have You. Billboard reported at the time that no songwriter in the history of the world had ever accomplished such a streak, and even after several decades, the record continues to be unbroken. By this point, Barry was not merely predominating the charts. Rather, he was the charts themselves. A question that few people dared to ask out loud, however, came along with that dominance. For how long could a single individual continue to be under such intense creative pressure? The aftermath of the streak, which occurred in 1978 as spring changed into summer, was almost more mind-blowing than the record itself. Over the course of the month of March, Barry Gibb had either written or co-authored 5 of the songs that were ranked within the top 10 on the Billboard Hot 100. The song 1S, which was Emotion by Samantha Sang and was another track by Barry Penn, was also in the top 10 at the same time. This was in addition to his 4 consecutive tracks that topped the charts. Journalists covering music were taken aback. It was impossible to avoid the Bee Gees and the artists who were a part of their expanded circle. Not only was this about chart rankings, but it was also about the complete saturation of the culture. This, however, is the opposite side. Having such supremacy resulted in a growing reaction brewing. Certain rock writers started expressing their disapproval of disco, namely focusing on the Bee Gees as the embodiment of the music. It is said that certain stations decreased the amount of Bee Gees airing out of concern that their audience was becoming exhausted. Barry was well aware that the tide will eventually turn. It was after that he admitted that it is difficult to remain at the top forever. But even in 1978, it seemed as though the Gibb sound could go on for an infinite amount of time. Were you prepared for a gentle or a severe fall when it finally arrived? In spite of the sparkle and the gold records, the streak's effects were felt behind the scenes. In addition to handling the media frenzy, Barry was working practically non-stop, dividing his time between writing for the Bee Gees, producing for other artists, and making sure everything was in order. After recording vocal takes late into the night, he would wake up to arrange strings for another track. This was a common practice from him. In those years, Barry has stated publicly that we were in the studio every single day, and there was no time for us to take a breath. Because of the unrelenting pressure to achieve perfection from himself, the record company, and the audience, the pleasure of writing songs was sometimes obscured by the monotony of the process. Even while the hits continued to come in throughout 1979, the world was on the verge of a change. At the same time as the anti-disco campaign was gaining steam, Barry's rule at the very top was about to be confronted with its most significant obstacle. However, despite the fact that the streak began to fade into history, its legacy continued to be impenetrable. The riotous event known as Disco Demolition Night took place in Chicago during the summer of 1979. It was a radio stunt in which records were blown up on a baseball field. As a result of the public's opposition to disco, the Bee Gees became a victim of collateral damage. And this is what makes it so remarkable. The backlash did not affect the record that Barry set in the beginning of 1978. In spite of the fact that the Bee Gees were removed from the playlists of U.S. radio stations, no other songwriter was able to duplicate that run of 4 consecutive hits. How come? Due to the fact that it wasn't simply about disco. The amazing ability of Barry Gibb to tap into music, passion, and timing was the highlight of the performance. In other words, his songs did more than just establish a trend, they defined it. Over the course of his latter years, Barry would compose songs for artists such as Barbra Streisand, Dionne Warwick, and Heartbreaker, as well as Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton, whose songs were titled Islands in the Stream. Every single one of them was a hit, but nothing nearly matched the absolute dominance of that streak in 1978. Veterans in the industry continue to refer to it as the perfect storm. There are certain songs, singers, and cultural moments that are perfect for the occasion. At the heart of it all was a single individual who appeared to have an open line of communication to the musical pulse of the entire world. Even at this late hour, the question remains: Anyone ever going to be able to break the record? There is a possibility that Barry's run will continue indefinitely given the current method of chart calculation, which includes streaming, playlists, and scattered audiences. What exactly does all of this mean? Barry has 4 straight hits that have reached number 1. The 1-second delay was not merely a coincidence of timing. Constant effort, profound musical sensibilities, and a rare capacity to write for voices other than his own were the ingredients that went into the creation of these works. There is a strong temptation to imagine the streak as the pinnacle of one's career. However, Barry has stated on numerous occasions that the record was not the true incentive. Hearing other musicians bring his tunes to life was the most memorable part. According to him, the quality of a song is directly proportional to the talent of the singer. It is possible to think of the streak as a time capsule. It represents a moment in time when the songwriting of a single individual had the potential to influence the whole pop landscape. At a time when radio still had the ability to appoint a monarch, when song was the language that was understood by everyone. Any chance that it will occur again? Not likely at all. However, it is possible that this is the objective, as there are some records that are not intended to be broken. Their purpose is to serve as a reminder of the possibilities that can be realized when skill, timing, and sheer creative fire all come together. Despite the passage of time, Barry Gibb's record remains unbroken, unrivaled, and never to be forgotten. Do you have any thoughts? In the current music industry, is it possible for anyone to pull this off? Alternatively, was this a storm that we will never see again, a once-in-a-lifetime event? Your ideas are welcome in the comments section. Be sure to subscribe to our channel if you are interested in hearing additional true stories of the greatest jaw-dropping moments in the history of music. The next story that we share with you might just alter the way that you listen to your favorite song for the rest of forever.